He bought a losing team for $10 million. Now, 8 years later, he runs a team that is worth at least $30 million.
Owning the Yankees like owning the Mona Lisa. That's something that you never sell.
What does it say about George Steinbrenner when the Yankees lose?
It says he's one of the worst losers in the world.
They had cheered in this stadium.
They did. They cheered when they announced that I was suspended.
Welcome to 60 Minutes on Classic. I'm Steve Croft. In this episode, we'll examine the life and career of a single sports figure, arguably modern sports' most famous and most controversial owner. I'm talking about George Steinbrenner, of course. During his more than 30 years as the principal owner of the New York Yankees, the boss, as the New York tabloids call him, has preached a fiery, winner-take-all gospel that has resulted in unprecedented sports glory and more than a little notoriety. He is one of the few owners in sports who has been booed in his own stadium and suspended twice from the game. Fans and the media have accused him of everything from being a troublemaker in his own locker room to selling baseball out to big business. Love him or hate him, though, the media couldn't stay away, and neither could 60 Minutes. We first met George Steinbrenner in 1981, before his popularity with the Yankee fans began to dip. Harry Reasoner caught up with him during spring training.
Even if you don't know the difference between a double and a double play, we'll bet you've heard of George Steinbrenner. His mouth is a weapon that makes headlines almost every time he uses it. And George loves headlines.
The amount of space or coverage I try to tell my athletes that we get, no big corporation in America that was in the consumer business could afford to buy. And we're very fortunate because of that, because we get that as a part of the media telling people what's going on, and because they want to know what's going on with the Yankees.
Thank you.
The fans mobbed him every time he showed up at spring training camp in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Okay. All right.
You heard people calling out, George, more often than they yelled, Reggie.
Okay. We're going to win it this year, World Series. We got it, New York.
When a guy driving a cab or working on a building in New York yells down, "Attaboy, do this or do that," that's important to me. And I want them to know I'm involved because I'm like they are. I die when we lose, just like they do.
It's easy to understand why the fans are behind Steinbrenner. He bought the Yankees in 1973 from a corporation that will remain nameless. The only corporation that ever lost money on the sale of a Major League Baseball team. One hint, I work for that corporation. He bought a losing team for $10 million. Now, 8 years later, he runs a team that has won 2 World Series, 3 American League pennants, and 4 division titles. A team that is favored to get to the World Series again this year. A team that is worth at least $30 million. But he's not selling.
Owning the Yankees like owning the Mona Lisa. That's something that you never sell.
From what you hear about Steinbrenner, you'd think his whole life was baseball, that he had been born at the age of 42 to own the Yankees. It's not true. He was born on the 4th of July, 1930, in Rocky River, Ohio. He was on the track team and president of the Glee Club at Williams College. He was an assistant football coach at Northwestern and Purdue. He took over the family business, a fleet of cargo ships on the Great Lakes, when his father retired in 1963, and by 1967 was chairman of the board of the American Shipbuilding Company, with shipyards in Florida and Ohio.
Have you got her pumped out yet?
She's all pumped out and ready for inspection.
When are you going to inspect?
He has a wife and 4 children, but he's on the move so much he rarely gets to see them. We won't even pretend that Steinbrenner is just a lovable pussycat. His entire life seems to have been based on Leo DeRocher's philosophy that nice guys finish last. He's a nice guy to talk to, but almost impossible to work for. In the last 8 seasons, Steinbrenner has had 5 managers: Bill Verdon, Billy Martin, Bob Lemon, Dick Hauser, and Gene Michael. Verdon lasted a year and a half. Martin lasted 2.5 years. Hauser lasted 2 games. Lemon, less than a year. Back came Martin for less than a year. Back came Hauser for 1 year. Now Steinbrenner's boy is Michael. He only has a 1-year contract, and he must know he's got to win a World Series to get renewed.
How about some of the criticisms about your brand of baseball?
You have too many managers.
I pay them all, Harry. I do. I have a lot of managers.
All still on the payroll?
They're all still on the payroll, and most of them are still my friends. The Billy Martin return, sure, there was a little bit of showbiz in that for me, but I think that baseball is basically showbiz. When we get to the day, it's no longer just a sport. It's entertainment today.
Sometimes the publicity boomerangs on Steinbrenner. For instance, when Martin left the first time, he bitterly called Steinbrenner a convicted felon. He later apologized. But the problem is, it was true. In 1974, Steinbrenner pleaded guilty to making illegal contributions to the 1972 Nixon campaign. He was fined $15,000, and Baseball Commissioner Bowie Kuhn suspended him from all baseball activities for 2 years.
What I did was I went to my employees and I said, look, if you give $1, I'll give $3 to the campaign. I thought it was necessary for us, the company, and I gave my own personal money. There was no question about that. But the $25,000 that the employees as a total put up, there was a question because it was in technical violation of this particular law, which had been on the books all those years and never enforced, and finally somebody decided they wanted to enforce it.
Last fall, when the Yankees lost the American League playoffs in 3 straight games to Kansas City, Steinbrenner's reactions were recorded by the TV cameras.
That was awfully embarrassing because my mother said, you didn't say what I think you said, dear. And I said, geez, Mother, I didn't know they had the cameras on me. But it was embarrassing. But on the other hand, Harry, I want the fans to know that when we're not firing, when we're not really fighting, that I'm as hurt as they are.
When we return, Steinbrenner puts his money where his mouth is.
76, when the players won the right to become free agents after 6 years' experience and to sell themselves to the highest bidder, most owners felt the free agents would destroy baseball. Not George Steinbrenner.
Now, I never made any bones about free agency. I said I'm going to participate. Now, some of these fellas said, oh, we're not going to have any part of it, and Steinbrenner's terrible.
Since then, he has traded for, or outbid other owners for, practically his entire lineup. Not one of his starting players came from the Yankee farm system. The team is liberally sprinkled with the cream of the free agents. Pitcher Tommy John, $600,000 a year. Pitcher Rich Gossage, $500,000. Infielder Bob Watson, $400,000. Reggie Jackson, $600,000. Outfielder Dave Winfield, added this season at a cost of $1,300,000 a year. It's the biggest payroll in baseball. No wonder sports writers call the Yankees the best team money can buy.
Now, when I get back to here, I'm back on that back leg pretty good.
Steinbrenner will pay top dollar for managers and players, but he expects them to win all the time. God help them if they don't. He's notorious for openly criticizing his players when he doesn't think they're giving him his money's worth. Suppose I went out in the field now with a camera and picked 8 players at random. What would they say about you?
Well, I think they would say that maybe, I really don't know what they say. I think you're probably going to do that, but...
George says a lot of things about his employees that sometimes it upsets us.
Sure, he's gotten on my back, but, you know, I think that goes with, you know, being a professional athlete as far as, you know, him demanding a lot from you.
I know I'm hard on him, and I never congratulate him and pat him on the back. I'm not that kind of a leader. I guess I'm more of a Patton than I am an Eisenhower.
This spring's big battle was George versus Reggie. And as usual, it was fought mostly in the newspapers. Reggie, tell me about George Steinbrenner.
Do I have to? Well, my buddy. You know, I guess on the social side of it, or psychological, if you were a psychiatrist, it would really be a thrill to do a guy like George Steinbrenner or talk about him or try to analyze him or whatever. But I've had my ups and downs with him, and mostly ups, and I guess the downs get publicized because it does make news, and I think that George is quite aware of it. You've got to give him a great deal of credit for being intelligent enough and smart enough to know how to create all of this hubbub and turn it into money.
Controversy continued to swirl around Steinbrenner. In 1981, the year this piece first aired, he removed manager Gene Michael, replacing him with Bob Lemon. But he apparently couldn't make up his mind about either, and replaced Lemon a few months later with, well, Gene Michael. Through it all, the Yankees continued winning during the regular season, but not the 1981 World Series. Reggie Jackson signed with the California Angels at the end of the season, finally escaping the Yankees, who wouldn't make it back to the playoffs for 14 long years. Looking back on things, Steinbrenner would later say letting Reggie get away was the biggest mistake of his career. When we met George Steinbrenner again in 1987, 6 years after our first interview, the relentless criticism of players and the revolving door policy for managers was continuing to drive fans nuts. And even Steinbrenner appeared to be getting tired of his own shenanigans and all of the attention he was drawing from the media. Ed Bradley interviewed the boss at a time when he was personally shouldering a lot of the blame for his team's lack of success.
After 13 managerial changes, firings, trades, and losing seasons, many of the fans have had it.
It's just not fun anymore because we understand now that the team can't perform at 100% when the guy is constantly badgering them, making them feel guilty because they make $1 million a season. It's ridiculous.
By mid-season, the headlines cried,
Butt out. Right. And that's what I did. August 8th, I butted out. Somebody put it in the players' bulletin board, Ed. Put 2 copies of it up there. I think I know who it was, but those guys told me no, and I'll take their word. So I said on August 8th, okay, you guys want me to butt out? You put it in your team bulletin board? I'm out. And I haven't said a word about the team since. And we were in first place when I butted out.
And now?
Now we're 8 games out in 4th place.
What does that say?
Well, I don't know what it says. But I'll tell you, if we finish there, the discipline goes back in next year.
But what bothers the fans most is not the discipline of their heroes, but the public criticism. New York Times reporter Murray Chass.
You have to wonder what drives a man to pick out a whipping boy each year and have that person be the star of the team. Reggie Jackson for several years, when Jackson left Dave Winfield, and now almost Mattingly.
Don Mattingly, .330 hitter, 1985's most valuable player. He set a record for consecutive home runs. Yet even Mattingly's felt the boss's criticism.
I don't feel like a person that I need discipline. I feel like I'm a professional player, and I come out prepared to play. Discipline in my work habits make me a better player. Discipline in other ways, reprimands, I don't think make me a better player.
Steinbrenner copes with losing when 60 Minutes on Classic continues.
Brenner, a letter from a disillusioned Yankee fan.
Humiliating and demeaning the team and manager has only succeeded in upsetting everyone, including the fans. It has not resulted in games won, division championships, or World Series winners.
It hasn't, huh? It hasn't meant championships and winning teams. We've won more games than anybody else in baseball, and we've won more championships in the last decade than anybody else in baseball. So right there, his argument's wrong. But I agree with him that you never seek to demean anybody, or hopefully you don't. Sometimes to get your point across, that's the way it's placed.
You get bothered when somebody says, you know, you're a real jerk.
I
mean, that can't be easy to take.
You put yourself above it. You just try to rise above that.
I read somewhere that you had fired a secretary and then paid her kid's way through college.
Well, that's true. What she didn't do was she didn't make my reservation on the airplane. I got the desk and the plane was sold out. And I was so mad I called her. I told her to leave. I said, get out of here. And I felt so bad about it later that night. I called up my people and I said, get a hold. How old is her son? And he said, well, he goes to college next year. I said, okay, where's he going? And he told me. And I said, okay, pay for it. And she showed up the next day. She said, you didn't have to do that. I said, why? She says, you're not going to fire me anyway. I said, what do you mean? I can fire you. I'm the boss. She says, no, you're not. And she just walked to her desk and sat down.
And
I couldn't get rid of her. She's still with me. That was 16 years ago, 15 years ago.
It turns out that many people that Steinbrenner's fired have eventually returned.
If these guys didn't have a tiny bit of respect for you, the Cerrones, the Tommy Johns, and the Bucky Dents, how come they came back? They could have gone other places. Clyde King could go with any team in baseball. So could Bob Lemon. But they come back.
Veteran Yankee catcher Rick Cerrone had been traded by the Yankees 3 years ago.
He went out of here saying what a lousy guy I was, and I was this and I was that. He called me last year when nobody would listen to him. He says, I didn't think you'd call me back. I said, why? He says, because of the things I said. I said, hey, every game you played for me when you were here, you gave me 110%. I saw you black and blue sometimes go out there. I said, I'll always talk to you. I said, what can I do for you? He says, I don't suppose you'd be willing to take a chance with me. You'd have to give up a second-round draft choice. I said, get your butt down to Fort Lauderdale and get your uniform.
Yankee catcher Rick Cerrone.
I feel George, one-on-one, is a fine individual. I think he wants to win. It's simple as the bottom line is he has to win.
Are you a graceful loser?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'm like a Yankee fan. My foot has gone through a number of television sets in my time. I bleed like those guys out there do, the fans. I mean, they hate to see you lose, and I hate to lose.
You take it personally?
Yes. Yes, I
I mean,
do.
what does it say about George Steinbrenner when the Yankees lose?
It says he's one of the worst losers in the world. You show me a good loser, and I'll show you a loser. And I got to be one of the worst.
Steinbrenner's impatience with losing Yankee teams would continue as times got much worse before they got better for the Bronx Bombers. But all of Steinbrenner's maneuvers seemed to have finally paid off by the time Charlie Rose interviewed him in 1999. By then, George Steinbrenner was back on top of the world.
The former shipbuilder has become a baseball star in his own right. And he's not one to shy away from the limelight, especially now that it's shining in his direction after more than 25 years as the boss.
No team in the 25 years from 73 until last year, through last year, has won more baseball games than the Yankees. And that's what it's about. No team in baseball has won more games than we have.
Last fall, after winning a record 125 games in one season, the Yankees won the World Series. Steinbrenner was overcome. Last year,
Yeah.
tough guy. Some say at one time, the most hated guy in baseball, they said about him.
Yeah.
Hard,
Yeah.
tough,
Yeah.
driven, passionate.
Was a little weepy.
Weepy.
Yeah, weepy.
This is truly, you can say it now, one of the greatest teams in baseball.
To understand just how sweet this victory was, you have to turn back the clock to the 1980s. That's when the Yankees, long one of baseball's legendary teams, suffered a legendary fall from grace, dropping from first place to last in one disastrous decade. There were those who said during the 80s that you drove this organization into the ground, that George Steinbrenner was responsible for the deterioration of a world championship.
That's true. A lot of people said that. Yeah.
What do you say?
Well, I say they may be right in some ways.
So when someone looks back at that time and says George was meddling too much,
Possible.
he was not listening to other people, he did not have his, he didn't respect the farm system that had been built up.
Possible.
He simply didn't know as much baseball as he thought he did.
Totally accurate.
And Steinbrenner admits he didn't behave well under the circumstances.
I'm not an easy man. I've never been a good loser, and I don't suppose I ever will be.
By 1990, it looked like things couldn't get worse for George Steinbrenner. Not only was his team last in the league, but also the boss was suspended from baseball, benched for 2 years.
Mr. Steinbrenner has agreed to resign.
What he had done broke not only the rules of baseball, but the rules of simple decency. He actually paid someone to investigate one of his own star players, Dave Winfield, just to see if he could ruin his reputation.
Do you feel you've embarrassed the Yankees, George? Do you feel you embarrassed the Yankees?
That never should have happened. For whatever reason, if it was my fault, fine. Okay. I accept that. If
Well, it was
Yogi,
your fault that you gave somebody $40,000 to find some information on him.
I'm not going to argue that. Okay?
By the time the story came out in the newspapers, the fans had had it with George Steinbrenner. And when the announcement was made that the boss was banned from baseball,
Fans must have just heard about you.
there was a standing ovation in Yankee Stadium. You knew that they had cheered in this stadium.
Yes, they did.
Cheered?
Yeah. That was embarrassing. It really hurt. Really hurt. They did. They cheered when they announced that I was suspended.
I mean, that would have crushed me.
Yeah, it was tough. I went through a real difficult time then. It was really tough. But you got to battle back.
2 years later, Steinbrenner was back. And just to make sure no one missed the point, he posed for the cover of Sports Illustrated as Napoleon returning from Elba.
When we return, Steinbrenner does damage control.
Steinbrenner's legendary feuds with his players have all but ended, and lately he has made a point of making amends. Last year, he invited now-retired Dave Winfield back to the Yankee fold. This year, it was Yogi Berra's turn. Ever since he was fired as manager back in 1985, he had stayed away from Yankee Stadium.
He didn't tell me I was fired. He sent somebody else to get fired, and I didn't like that.
Didn't like it?
No.
Not the way to treat a man, is it?
No, I don't think so.
And you held a grudge?
Yep. 14 years.
There might never have been a reconciliation with Yogi Berra if it weren't for Yankee icon Joe DiMaggio.
I became very close to Joe D in his final years. And more than once he mentioned to me, you've got to get him back. You've got to get him back. He should be here. He was Yankee. He from start to finish, he is Yankee.
Just 2 months before DiMaggio died, Steinbrenner finally told Yogi he was sorry.
If there was a mistake, it was my mistake, and I apologized to him.
And it was great the way he did it, you know, had a little tear. It was
tear?
good. Yeah.
Because
yeah.
he was sorry.
Yeah. He said, I did the wrong thing, I know it. I made a mistake and all that.
This spring, Steinbrenner invited Yogi back to Yankee Stadium to throw out the first pitch on opening day. It's things like this that are making people say the toughest boss in baseball has mellowed. But Don Zimmer, who has worked for Steinbrenner off and on since the early 80s, doesn't see it that way.
Everybody wants to believe that George has changed. He says the one way he's changed is he has more patience. You see that?
Do you see it? I don't know George any different today than I did 6 years ago.
You haven't seen it.
I mean, you know, if he's changed, maybe it's out in the parking lot or something. I don't know. He's George, and he'll be George until the day I die. He's a must guy. You have to win. You have to win. I mean, I get a kick out of it sometimes when he says, you have to win today. It's TV. Well, to me, there's no such thing as you have to win unless they're, what are they going to do, cut your neck off or something?
This is my favorite view of the whole stadium.
For most people, baseball is about winning and losing and how you handle both. But not for Steinbrenner. He dreams of a game where losing isn't even a part of it.
Are you the guy that said to Joe Torre, is it possible to win 162
No,
games?
No, I didn't. I didn't say that. I said, is it possible? Has any team in baseball ever gone undefeated? Yeah. And he says, that's pressure. He says, that is pressure.
The Yankees didn't go undefeated, of course, but they did win more world championships, ranking the 90s Yankees with the most successful Yankees dynasties of the 30s and the 50s. In 2005, Steinbrenner continued to pay highly for the best talent available. His payroll topped the majors at a whopping $203 million, and he continued to push his expensive talent to its limits. And now, some parting thoughts on Steinbrenner and the stories you've just seen from his friend, 60 Minutes creator Don Hewitt.
If you know George, he's very likable. Now, I can't say he's likable to the country. They think he has turned a sport into a business. But then again, he's not the first guy who's done that. He's done it bigger and better than anybody else ever has. I like him a lot. Should that be a determining factor in how we handle him? No. Was it? Yes. So I plead guilty.
With a look at the boss of all bosses in pro sports, this has been 60 Minutes on Classic. I'm Steve Croft. See you next time.